So I recently got finished rewatching a bunch of Futurama episodes I saw as a kid, but never understood because I have learning difficulties. I was curious to know what I didn't understand as a kid, and wanted to figure out what was funny about the show. I sat and watched a lot of it as a kid because my father put it on, so much so that every single scene from seasons 1 to 5 is in my memory somewhere, but not in any specific order. So this is like organising them. But there have been two episodes besides the popular episode that has gained my interest. One of them was Bender doing robot wrestling, where his career killer was being a gender bender. And the other episode was Bend Her. That's what it's called. No, I haven't seen any of the later seasons, so this could all be invalidated. Going off script briefly, I have seen Utopia now. It's better, but not the best. So anyway, Bend Her is an episode that, and spoilers by the way, follows Bender cheating in the Olympics, posing as a Fembot. But there was a mandatory sex examination to determine that the bots were Fembots. No, I just realised in proofreading this that the check wasn't to prove their birth sex, it was just the sex they identify as. Hence why I call that Bender's other identity past. And Bender realised he was in trouble for needing to do this check anyway before he transitioned. He managed to get the professor to transition him to a Fembot, which apparently is done by changing the oil fluids, and then lives the life as a Fembot for a while, but eventually gets into more hot water, not because of the Olympics, but because of dating Calculon, who wants to go all the way with her, and then breaks up the marriage in a strange way, only to detransition after. This episode was questionable, with a terrible message in my opinion. The message is essentially saying it's okay to cheat, but not okay to transition, which isn't great. At least that's what I got from it, and I could be wrong. Admittedly, it's more ahead of the time than The Simpsons in terms of trans representation, but it isn't perfect. Also, just going off note here again off script. King of the Hill had a good episode on a drag queen. Highly recommend people watch that. Anyway, I think if there had been actual critical thinking used in this episode during the writing, the flaws would be obvious. For me, with the issue with the episode is to do with the fact that there's no repercussions for cheating past the Olympics part. And the fact transition was used as an excuse to win a few times, that was the problem. And then the fact that there wasn't anything about identity, which actually I think is the biggest problem now that I think about it. It's about being a true self. Bender was for the time he had transitioned, but nobody really mentioned anything about being true to yourself. It's worth noting again off script here. My father was kind of a bigot anyway. He was definitely against trans people and homosexuality. He was Christian. And I think this episode could have easily sent a message there. Maybe could convince him that it's fine to be trans. Just by talking about the true identity thing. That's the most important part of it. But besides the episode, I myself am not trans, but I completely understand about being true to yourself. Especially as an MP, which leads to this post. I've made the title of this because it will grab attention. We are currently in the midst of a repeat of history, at least in the US, with floods of anti-LGBTQ laws entering the legal sphere, and this is no doubt going to be catastrophic on a scale like we've never seen before. And I do agree with all the comparisons to Nazi Germany in the 1930s, because that is what's being repeated here. It's another planned genocide, and the lack of responses denying it with reason only proves that. I don't know why I remember that actually. I think it's because of like the reason you're genociding, and like who, like what are you actually trying to do with this? Back on script, the trans solution is simply this. People have a view of trans people, plus gay and queer people, for that matter, that is disconnected from any demonstrable evidence. This people is called danger. The reason we often use demonstrable evidence to make a case is because it provides the least amount of bias, and it has to work both ways too. Meaning, if you want to say make a case that trans people for some reason molest children, you have to provide as much evidence on both sides to prove it, and make a percentile, and compare that evidence to non-trans people. It isn't as black and white as trans solutionists make it. There's far more to the story than that. Similarly with, you said, gay child molesters. You need to compare the evidence. Compare it to straight child molesters. I can almost guarantee there's no correlation between orientation and accounts of this. When you're not using demonstrable evidence, you forfeit any right to be calling what you're saying as truth. The deadly pandemic swinging society, and or as we know it now, is pseudoscience and pseudo-intellectualism. You can make things up that sound convincing, hence anti-vax. We've been doing that since before Christ. If there was a Christ, or maybe Christ was made up to sound smart, like this, like I've just explained. But we cannot determine whether something is truthful or not until it can be demonstrated. For example, can I clap my hands? Everybody knows. Sure, I can clap my hands, but I need to show it. And that's really how simple it is. Meanwhile, if you ask someone to provide evidence of, say, drag queens molesting children, you probably won't get any. But you can provide evidence of churches not only molesting children, but covering it up, and using their own religion as a scapegoat for it, with very few churches, let alone people actually condemning it. And I can make up a story now about churches using drag queens as a scapegoat. That's my crazy theory, but that is again making it up, and not demonstrable evidence, but just note I haven't looked into it. The absurd reality we live in today is that we can't even trust each other anymore. I say this as someone who is openly pansexual, autistic, and have learning difficulties. You cannot put words out there that intend to harm others, and you definitely can't say anything without demonstrable evidence to back your claim. The dangers of misinformation are more prevalent than ever. And I will turn on situations with the LGBTQ plus communities and allies if they push misinformation too. I won't stand for bias either. If I have a good reason to not exist, I'm open to hearing it. If there isn't, then it's simply false. There is no debate to be had there. But the final thing about this delusion is about respect and existence. Regardless of whether someone is trans or because of their true identity or because they want to look a certain way, you have to respect it. Deception is what it always has been, deception. But someone identifying as a woman in a man's body is not deception. They are women, that's their own words, and they have described themselves as a woman. Likewise, if you identify as your assigned birth sex, male for example, you've identified yourself as male. If you can't respect someone for being themselves, you don't respect yourself either, because you don't agree that anyone should be allowed to be their true selves. Meaning you've invalidated yourself too. It's essentially a ricochet effect. You throw a punch at someone, but the punch comes back to you. It's basic logic and probably karma. This and the truth that that trans people exist with us. Whether you like it or not, there is no truth in denying someone's intentions. A trans person's intentions is very often to be who they want to be. There's nothing to look into and just somebody to listen to instead. Because that's how you determine who a trans person is, not a gentle inspection, just how they act. This is why there is a delusion around the view of trans people. And as extension of that, gay people, disabled people and women, even race. To achieve a realistic nirvana, the demonstrable truth must be told, not your armchair theories. Also, happy late Trans Day of Visibility.